Detective Jason Brooks stood in front of the old house, absorbing the silence that enveloped him. The night, covered by thick clouds, hung heavy like a dark shroud, blocking out the moonlight. It was in such darkness that he was accustomed to working when cases crossed his path that carried more than just ordinary crimes. In his hands, he held photographs that had mysteriously come into his possession. They were old images of the house, showing people who seemed normal enough, but their eyes, those terrifying, hollow stares that looked directly through the camera, made Jason realize something was wrong. This house was not merely old and forgotten. It was the home of something else, something that should never have left its walls. Cases tied to spirits and demons are never simple, he thought, hearing the old floorboards creak beneath his feet, hidden under a blanket of dust and grime. A few days ago, a local woman had come to him, reporting a series of nightly nightmares and ominous occurrences in her home. With each word she spoke, Jason felt the weight of the case growing heavier. She had talked about strange figures that appeared in her house during the dark nights. At first, they were just shadows that disappeared quickly, but soon, cold hands that touched her neck, choking her sleep. Eventually, the voices. Muffled, merciless, whispering her name in the dead of night. The local church had already conducted several exorcisms, but each time, the events returned. The situation was getting worse, and when the woman finally reached out to him, Jason knew that conventional methods wouldn't suffice. He raised his gaze to the massive oak doors of the house. Some of them appeared to be splitting, cracking under the pressure of unseen forces. Jason tightened his grip on the handle of his gun. His old partner used to joke that not all demonic cases could be solved with a bullet, but this time, he wasn't so sure. There were too many witnesses and too many horrifying stories surrounding this house. But one photograph, taken years ago, caught his attention the most. It was a picture of a little girl standing by the doors of this very house, her eyes empty, as though she didn't notice the world around her. Her shadow in the photo was blurred, but Jason could swear it was moving. Jason took a deep breath and approached the front door. The house seemed to watch him, its windows dark and hollow like eyes that had seen too much. He could feel the oppressive weight of its history pressing down on him, like an unseen hand tightening around his chest. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and decay, and even though it was summer, a strange chill clung to the ground. The door creaked open, its rusted hinges protesting the intrusion. Inside, the air was stale, as though it hadn't been disturbed in decades. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, the walls lined with faded wallpaper that peeled in places, revealing cracks in the plaster beneath. Jason's flashlight flickered as he moved deeper into the house, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance along with him. The quiet was almost suffocating, broken only by the occasional groan of the old house settling under its own weight. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook, flipping through it to review the notes he had taken from the woman's account. Her name was Emily Turner, a widow who had inherited the house from her late husband, a man who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. She claimed to have heard whispers in the walls, voices calling her name in the dead of night. And then the dreams, the same nightmare, over and over, where a shadowy figure stood at the foot of her bed, watching her with empty eyes. Jason paused at the end of the hall, where a door stood slightly ajar. The door led to what appeared to be the living room, but the heavy curtains had been drawn shut, plunging the room into an unnatural darkness. As he stepped inside, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. The room felt colder, much colder than it should have been, and his breath became visible in the air. The flashlight beam swept across the room, landing on a large, ornate mirror hanging on the far wall. Jason's heart skipped a beat as he noticed something strange. The reflection in the mirror was slightly off, distorted, like a ripple in water. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing just behind him, but when he turned, the room was empty. The feeling of being watched intensified, and Jason's gut told him that he wasn't alone. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs. Jason froze. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate, as though someone, or something, was moving slowly, purposefully, in the shadows above him. His hand instinctively moved to the gun at his side, but he knew it wouldn't help him here. No weapon could stop what he was about to face. With caution, he began to ascend the creaky staircase, each step groaning under his weight. As he reached the top, the air grew even colder, the silence deeper. At the end of the hallway, a door stood ajar, another room to investigate. But before he could take another step, a voice whispered through the darkness. A voice that wasn't human. "Leave, before it's too late." Jason spun around, heart pounding in his chest. His eyes scanned the hallway, but there was no one there. The voice was soft, yet it echoed in his mind, like a command he couldn't ignore. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but he couldn't. He had to find the truth. Steeling himself, he walked toward the open door. As he stepped inside, the temperature dropped even further, his breath now visible in the dim light. The room was small, furnished sparsely with old, dusty furniture. But it was the walls that caught his attention, covered in strange, cryptic symbols, drawn hastily, almost frantically, in what looked like blood. His flashlight lingered on one of the symbols, a jagged, circular design, and he felt an unsettling chill crawl up his spine. As he studied the markings, a sudden flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned, but again, no one was there. The hairs on his neck stood on end as he heard a faint whisper, closer now, almost directly behind him. "She never left." Jason's hand went to his gun, but before he could react, the door slammed shut, trapping him inside. He tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The room grew darker, the air thickening as the temperature plummeted further. He could hear the faint sound of breathing, slow, labored, and close. His pulse raced as he felt something brush against his shoulder, cold and wet, like the touch of a dead hand. "Who are you?" Jason called out, his voice trembling despite his efforts to stay composed. There was no response, but the whispers grew louder, more frantic, as though 1,000 voices were calling out to him from within the walls. Then, a figure materialized in the corner of the room. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow, but as Jason's eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw it clearly, an old man, pale and gaunt, his skin stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were hollow, empty pits that stared directly into Jason's soul. "Leave, or join us," the figure rasped, its voice a chilling rasp that seemed to reverberate in Jason's bones. The detective's heart hammered in his chest as he backed away, but the figure stepped closer, its form growing more solid with each passing second. Just as the figure reached out toward him, Jason heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, real footsteps, coming from the stairwell. A voice called his name from below. "Jason! Get out of there!" It was Emily. She was downstairs, her voice filled with terror. But before Jason could answer, the room around him seemed to shift, the walls warping, bending as if they were alive. And then, everything went black. Jason awoke with a start, his body jerking upright as if some unseen force had yanked him from a nightmare. His head was spinning, and for a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The air was thick with a bitter, metallic scent, and the darkness around him was suffocating. His chest felt tight, like he was being held in place by invisible hands, and a cold sweat drenched his clothes. He blinked, trying to adjust his vision, and realized he was no longer in the room with the cryptic symbols. Instead, he was lying on the cold, hard floor of what seemed like an abandoned cellar. His flashlight had fallen beside him, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. The only sound he could hear was the faint drip of water echoing in the silence. For a moment, he tried to shake off the dizziness, his mind racing. The last thing he remembered was the figure in the corner of the room, its hollow eyes staring through him, its cold, dead hand reaching for him. But that couldn't be right. Could it? Jason pushed himself to his feet, his legs unsteady as if he'd been drugged. He checked his gun, still holstered at his side, and then felt around his coat for his notebook. The photographs were gone. His stomach sank. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and he froze. "Jason?" Emily's voice came from above, trembling with fear. "Jason, are you there?" "Emily," Jason whispered, struggling to find his footing as he stumbled toward the stairs. His legs felt like lead, but he had to make it up there. He had to know what had happened. "Get out of here," he called back, his voice hoarse and weak. "Now." But before he could take another step, the temperature plummeted, and an icy gust of wind howled through the cellar. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he heard the whisper again, faint but unmistakable. "She never left." His heart raced as he turned toward the source of the voice, but there was nothing there, just the same dark, oppressive silence. But then, through the shadows, something caught his eye. The reflection of a figure, standing at the far end of the room. It was a woman, but not Emily. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her eyes wide and unblinking. The whisper came again, this time louder, more insistent. "You cannot leave, not until she takes you." Jason's blood ran cold. The woman in the corner, she was the one from the photograph, the one whose eyes were always empty. She had never left. He reached for his gun, but the woman stepped forward, her feet barely touching the ground as she glided toward him. Her face was twisted in agony, her mouth gaping open in a silent scream. And then, as if drawn by some invisible force, her arm reached out, extending toward him, her fingers impossibly long, like claws. Jason took a step back, but he was trapped. The walls seemed to close in around him, the darkness pressing in from all sides. He could hear the woman's breath, a low, guttural rasp that filled the air with an unbearable pressure. "No, no, please," he muttered, backing into the corner. "I don't want to be here." But the woman wasn't listening. She was getting closer, her eyes locked onto his as if she could see straight through him. The air was suffocating now, thick with the scent of decay and death. Jason could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, his chest tightening with every passing second. He reached for his flashlight, but it slipped from his grasp and rolled away into the darkness. The woman's clawed hand was now inches from his face. Her fingers curled, and just as she was about to touch him, the entire room seemed to shift. "Jason!" Emily screamed, her voice echoing through the house. "Run!" The world around Jason twisted, the walls warping like melted wax. The temperature dropped even further, and for a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. He felt his body go numb, as if the cold had seeped into his very bones. Then, just as the woman's fingers grazed his skin, there was a loud crash, and everything went dark. When Jason opened his eyes again, he was no longer in the cellar. He was back in the living room, the same room where he had first seen the disturbing photograph. The mirror on the wall was shattered, shards of glass scattered across the floor. The air was thick with dust, and the house was completely silent. His heart raced as he stood, disoriented, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it all been a hallucination? Or was he still trapped in some twisted version of reality? The door to the hallway creaked open, and Emily appeared, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with terror. "Jason," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We need to leave, now." But as she stepped into the room, her foot caught on a shard of glass, and she fell to the floor with a scream. Jason rushed to her side, but when he touched her arm, he recoiled. Her skin was ice cold, and her once vibrant eyes were now empty, lifeless, just like the ones in the photograph. A voice, low and guttural, whispered from the darkness around them. "She's mine now." Jason turned, his heart racing. In the shattered reflection of the mirror, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The woman from the photograph, Emily, was standing behind him, her ghostly figure staring back at him with those same hollow eyes. And then, just as everything seemed to close in around him, The mirror shattered completely, its pieces falling to the floor like raindrops. The darkness swallowed him whole.